Welcome to the debate. There used to be this incredibly iconic image in the corporate world.
Oh, you mean the retirement party?
Exactly, yeah. The retirement party where an employee is handed a gold watch after like 40 years of continuous service. It was this physical, ticking symbol of a profound reciprocal bond.
Right.
You gave the company your best years, and, well, they gave you security. It was a visible, tangible marker of loyalty.
Yeah, the classic gold watch. I mean, it's a beautiful piece of machinery, sure. But if we're being completely honest about what that watch actually represented,
Yeah?
it was also a pretty sophisticated mechanism of control. I mean, it was a reward for unwavering compliance, funded by a defined benefit plan that essentially trapped you in one place.
Trapped you?
Yeah, we look back at it with so much nostalgia, but it was a heavily engineered dynamic. We like to think of it as mutual affection, but it was often just financial gravity holding people in place.
Well, I think that nostalgia and your skepticism of it points exactly to the foundational question we are tackling today, because we're examining the rapidly shifting landscape of employee loyalty, drawing heavily from Business Ethics Chapter 7 on what employees owe employers.
Right, and it's a massive shift.
It really is. So the core issue we have to unravel is this. Is the concept of employee loyalty still a genuine reciprocal moral duty, or has it completely devolved into a purely transactional legal mechanism designed to protect corporate self-interest?
A really vital question.
I'm taking the position that employee loyalty, real ethical loyalty, remains a foundational commitment to an organization's success and is the essential fabric of any functioning workplace culture.
And I'll be arguing that structural economic shifts have effectively killed that romanticized notion of genuine loyalty. From my perspective, it has been entirely replaced by coercive legal constructs and restrictive contracts.
So you think it's purely defensive now?
Completely. Turning what you call a moral duty into a strictly transactional reality governed by risk management.
Well, to begin, I think we have to elevate what we actually mean by loyalty here. I'm not talking about the baseline common law duty where you just don't actively sabotage your employer.
Sure, the bare minimum.
Right. True ethical loyalty is proactive. As the Loyalty Research Center defines it, it means being genuinely committed to the success of the organization.
But what does that actually look like in practice?
It requires high emotional intelligence, the capacity to recognize other people's emotions, manage your own, and show the empathy necessary to build a collaborative environment.
Okay, empathy is great, but
It also requires adhering to a code of conduct, and not out of fear, mind you, but out of a shared moral posture regarding things like financial integrity and brand respect.
I understand the appeal of that framework. I really do. It sounds wonderful in theory. But I have to push back on the idea that this reciprocal ethical loyalty can even exist in today's structure.
Why wouldn't it?
Because the primary economic phenomenon that altered loyalty wasn't like a decline in human empathy. It was the transition from defined benefit plans to defined contribution retirement plans.
You mean the shift to the 401k?
Exactly. The 401k or the 403b. We went from pensions that guaranteed your future based on your tenure to a system where the employee assumes virtually all the market risk.
Right.
The moment the company detached its long-term financial fate from the employee's long-term fate, the foundation for reciprocal loyalty basically evaporated.
But wait, doesn't that shift actually give the employee more agency? I mean, a 401k is portable, you own it.
Technically, yes.
If loyalty is forced by a pension you can't walk away from, as you said earlier with the whole financial gravity thing, is it really loyalty? I would argue that removing that constraint means the loyalty we see today has the potential to be much more authentic.
Agency to do what, though? I mean, bear all the risk while navigating an increasingly volatile job market? Just look at the demographic data we have.
You're talking about the turnover rates.
Right. Millennials are 3 times more likely to change jobs than previous generations. 90% of them leave within their first 3 years.
Oh, wow. 90%?
Yes. And they hold an average of 4 different jobs by the time they hit 32. They aren't doing this because they lack emotional intelligence or, a moral compass.
So you see it as a rational response.
Absolutely. They are rationally responding to an environment that shifted the risk onto their shoulders. And how do companies respond to this highly mobile workforce?
Well, they adapt their culture.
They don't cultivate the ethical loyalty you're talking about. They enforce compliance through restrictive legal tools, non-disclosure agreements, non-compete clauses, non-solicitation agreements. They've essentially outsourced loyalty to the legal department.
Okay, let's talk about those legal tools because I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on the mechanism behind them.
Sure, go ahead.
I don't view NDAs or non-competes as a substitute for loyalty. I view them as the necessary ethical boundaries that protect an organization's vulnerability.
Vulnerability? From their own employees?
Well, yes. Companies invest immense capital in their intellectual property and trade secrets, right? Patents, copyrights, trademarks. And as we know, trade secrets are often only protected by a duty of secrecy.
Right, they aren't federally registered.
Exactly. They aren't shielded by federal registration in the same way a patent is, so they require confidentiality.
But you're conflating the protection of a legitimate, heavily researched trade secret with the blanket application of non-competes to restrict just, well, basic labor mobility.
I don't think I am. When a standard contract includes, say, a 1-year non-compete clause within a 100-mile radius or a 2-year non-solicitation clause, it is simply formalizing the boundaries of that common law ethical duty.
Formalizing it or weaponizing it?
Formalizing it, the company has invested deeply in its research, its brand positioning, and its client relationships. Asking an employee not to misappropriate that specific investment the moment they walk out the door isn't malicious coercion.
It certainly feels coercive to the employee.
It's asking for a baseline ethical respect for the resources that were shared with you during your tenure.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. If we look at how non-solicitation agreements are actually applied in the real world, they reveal a profound lack of trust.
How so?
Imagine an employee leaves for a better opportunity. The company will frequently threaten them with ruinous litigation to prevent them from taking clients who might actively want to follow them.
Well, those are the company's clients.
But what about former colleagues? They threaten lawsuits to stop colleagues who might prefer to work with that person elsewhere from leaving.
It's about protecting the team structure.
But if your workplace culture was truly a shared, organic, ethical partnership, you wouldn't need the threat of a lawsuit to keep your clients and your best talent from walking out the door. The default reliance on these contracts proves the company views the relationship as adversarial the very second the employee's utility comes into question.
I hear that, but I think you're confusing the perimeter with the actual building here.
What do you mean?
Contracts, NDAs, non-solicitation clauses, those are just the fence around the property. The actual house is the workplace culture.
Okay, the house.
Yes. The legal boundaries exist to keep the intellectual property from walking out the door, sure. But what happens inside those boundaries every single day is where the ethical duty of loyalty truly manifests.
Okay, let's look inside the house then. Because I argue the dynamics inside that house are just as engineered for control as the fence outside.
I would strongly argue they are engineered for safety and collaboration. Getting along with your coworkers, contributing to a positive atmosphere. These are substantive moral duties.
Getting along is a moral duty?
Absolutely. We all bring diverse personalities and ways of thinking to the job. Without emotional intelligence and a genuine willingness to step into someone else's shoes, the workplace quickly becomes toxic.
Well, obviously, nobody wants a toxic workplace.
Right. And frankly, a toxic workplace doesn't just mean people are unhappy. It can become dangerous. When you look at the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, and their data regarding workplace violence.
Right, the 4 categories of violence.
Exactly. Whether it's criminal intent, worker-on-worker hostility, issues spilling over from personal relationships, or customer violence, mitigating those risks requires a culture of profound respect.
Preventing workplace violence is obviously paramount. I mean, no one is arguing against safety.
Exactly. But how do you achieve that safety? Through ethical frameworks. This is exactly why comprehensive codes of conduct exist.
But those codes are often...
They aren't just arbitrary rules of corporate control. When a code dictates that sexual harassment is intolerable, or establishes strict cybersecurity protocols, or mandates general workplace respect, it is creating the moral architecture that keeps employees safe.
Sure.
Loyalty in the modern sense means actively participating in and upholding that safety culture.
I come at it from a different way. Empathy is vital, yes, but corporate culture and these comprehensive codes of conduct are frequently weaponized to silence workers and maintain asymmetric power.
Weaponized? That's a strong word.
But it's true. You mentioned that these codes are meant to foster a positive, collaborative atmosphere, but let's look at how atmosphere and etiquette have historically been managed inside your metaphorical house. Take pay secrecy.
You mean the historical pressure on employees not to discuss their compensation?
Precisely. For decades, companies used internal policies and the guise of maintaining a harmonious culture to explicitly prohibit employees from discussing their salaries with one another.
Right. That was a widespread practice.
They framed it as an etiquette issue, saying it was part of getting along with coworkers and not causing friction. But structurally, it was a calculated mechanism to maintain unfair advantages in compensation.
Which did disproportionately affect women and minorities, I agree.
Right. It was so abusive and deeply ingrained in corporate culture that it required aggressive legislative intervention. 10 specific states, California, Colorado, Illinois, Louisiana, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Jersey, and Vermont, had to step in and explicitly ban employers from imposing pay secrecy rules.
Yes, the laws had to change.
So if corporate culture was genuinely about ethical loyalty and shared success, legislatures wouldn't have had to step in to protect an employee's right to talk about their own paycheck.
That's a fair historical critique, for sure. But outlawing pay secrecy is a correction of a flawed policy. It doesn't negate the fundamental need for corporate culture. It just, refines it to be more equitable.
But it proves that culture is often just a facade for control. And we see the exact same dynamic playing out right now with social media policies.
How so?
Employees are constantly reminded that there are strict limits to what they can post online, and that First Amendment protections generally do not apply to their speech regarding private employers.
Well, they are representing the brand.
Right. Companies enforce these sweeping social media policies under the banner of respecting the brand. But what is the mechanism there? It means the company is extending its control over your speech well outside the physical office, into your private life.
But their public speech impacts the company.
The relationship fundamentally remains about brand control and risk mitigation, not mutual respect or empathy.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame the social media issue differently. Protecting the brand isn't about totalitarian control of a person's private life. It's about consistency of values.
Values decided by the corporation, though.
True. But if an employee is publicly espousing views that directly contradict the ethical stance of the company, that's a breach of the commitment to the organization's success. Which actually brings us to what I consider the most extreme tests of loyalty.
Okay. Which are?
Areas of strict compliance and financial integrity.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning how an organization and its employees handle true ethical pressure, particularly around corruption. If you want to see where ethical loyalty is genuinely demanded, look at global ethics. Look at the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA.
Right, the anti-bribery law.
Exactly, which prohibits bribery in international business dealings. Now, imagine you are a manager trying to close a massive international deal and a foreign official demands a bribe.
It happens all the time.
It does. And paying that bribe might yield a massive short-term profit for the company. Refusing it might mean losing the deal entirely. Loyalty to the organization's actual values means refusing to engage in that behavior, no matter the pressure from the bottom line.
Assuming the organization's values actually prioritize the law over the profit, which is frankly a big assumption.
But that's exactly where ethical leadership comes in. Senior managers have to model that behavior. The same logic applies to rejecting insider trading. An employee who refuses to trade on non-public information is demonstrating a profound ethical loyalty, not just to the firm, but to the integrity of the market.
Okay, but...
And this leads to my strongest point. If an employee witnesses these violations, say a manager trying to authorize a bribe or cook the books, and they report it, that is the ultimate act of loyalty.
Wait, whistleblowing?
Yes. Whistleblowing isn't betrayal. Going to an official government agency to disclose a violation isn't just everyday criticism. It is saving the organization from its own ethical failures. They are attempting to realign the company with its own code of conduct. That is the highest form of being committed to the success of the organization.
That is a compelling argument. But have you considered the actual lived reality of what happens to those whistleblowers?
I know it can be incredibly difficult for them.
Difficult is an understatement. You are framing whistleblowing as the ultimate act of ethical loyalty, like this heroic intervention to save the company from itself.
It is heroic.
But how does the corporate apparatus actually react to these heroes? The reality is that whistleblowers almost universally face a deeply hostile environment in response to their actions.
Unfortunately, that does happen.
If a company truly viewed whistleblowing as a manifestation of loyalty, these individuals would be promoted. They would be celebrated. Instead, they are marginalized, systematically retaliated against, and functionally forced out of their industries.
Which is exactly why legal protections exist for them.
Yes, but think about the psychological mechanism behind those legal protections. It completely proves my point about the adversarial nature of this relationship.
How does a legal protection prove that?
Look at the False Claims Act and its qui tam provision. This is the mechanism that allows private citizens, relators, to file lawsuits on behalf of the government for fraud.
Right?
And crucially, it offers them a massive financial reward, a bounty, a percentage of the recovered funds. Why on earth does the government have to offer millions of dollars to get people to report fraud?
To offset the inherent risk to their career, obviously.
Exactly. Because the government realized that the corporate demand for absolute silence was so absolute and the environment so terrifying to the average worker that the only way to pierce that veil was to financially incentivize people to step forward.
I see what you're saying, but
If companies valued ethics over self-interest, insider trading and massive fraud wouldn't require federal bounties and complex legal shields to uncover. The necessity of that bounty system demonstrates that, from the corporate perspective, loyalty means absolute compliance and silence.
I wouldn't say absolute silence.
But when you break that silence, even to report a felony that could destroy the company, the corporate immune system doesn't see a loyal employee saving them, it sees a traitor that needs to be excised.
Look, I can't disagree that retaliation occurs. And when it does, it represents a catastrophic failure of management.
A very common failure.
But the existence of bad actors, even as systemic failure in how truth tellers are treated, doesn't negate the underlying moral framework. The ethical standard provided by codes of conduct and the requirement for organizations to strive for integrity still stands as the benchmark.
Even if they don't meet it?
Exactly. We shouldn't abandon the concept of loyalty just because it is difficult to practice in extreme circumstances.
But when the benchmark is only enforced through federal bounties and the fear of ruinous litigation, it ceases to be a moral framework. It's just an economic standoff at that point.
An economic standoff?
Yes. When you look at the totality of the mechanisms we've discussed, the deliberate shift of financial risk away from the employer via the 401k, the default reliance on NDAs and non-competes to restrict movement,
Right.
the historical suppression of wage discussions under the guise of etiquette, and the aggressive hostility toward whistleblowers, it becomes totally clear. The modern employer-employee relationship is governed entirely by risk management, not ethical commitment.
I think this brings us to a natural point to step back and weigh where we've landed in this discussion today.
I agree.
My stance remains that while the economic realities of employment have undeniably changed, and yes, the days of the guaranteed pension and lifelong tenure are largely behind us, the core expectation of loyalty remains a vital, living moral framework.
And you don't think it's just a legal transaction?
No, it cannot just be reduced to a legal transaction. The sheer necessity of emotional intelligence to maintain a safe environment, the ethical adherence to anti-corruption laws like the FCPA, and the fundamental respect required to collaborate, they demonstrate that we still owe our employers, and just as importantly, our coworkers, a genuine commitment to shared success.
And my position remains that the empirical reality of the modern workplace proves the relationship is now entirely transactional. Millennials changing jobs rapidly aren't lacking in morals. They are navigating a terrain where the employer has stripped away long-term guarantees.
So it's all just defensive for both sides?
Yes, the heavy reliance on non-competes, non-solicitation clauses, and the demonstrably hostile treatment of anyone who challenges the corporate narrative shows that modern corporate loyalty is a one-way street. It is paved almost entirely with legal liabilities and defensive strategies aimed at controlling the employee.
Well, I think where we undeniably converge today is the recognition that the traditional paradigm has been permanently altered. We are looking at a highly complex intersection, one where traditional concepts of duty and virtue are colliding with very modern, very aggressive corporate defensive strategies.
Agreed. The landscape is fundamentally different, and both employees and employers are having to navigate a much more rigid, legally defined terrain than they did even a few decades ago.
And there is certainly a wealth of nuance still to explore in the material, especially regarding the specific friction points where personal ethics meet corporate mandates.
Absolutely. The lines between what is an ethical duty, what is strictly legal, and what is simply an exercise of leverage are constantly shifting.
Which brings us right back to where we started, that ticking gold watch.
Ah, yes, the watch.
It used to be a symbol of a promise kept over a lifetime. Today, we have to ask ourselves if that watch has been replaced by the heavily monitored, strictly timed contract,
A much colder mechanism.
and whether that evolution represents a tragic loss of moral duty or simply a much more honest accounting of the business of work.
Thank you for joining us on the debate, and we leave it to you to decide where the line between ethical duty and corporate control truly lies.